We have this romantic idea that if only good people reach positions of power, then everything would be fine. Get the right person in office, the right CEO, the right leader at the helm, and surely their moral fiber will hold up. But history keeps teaching us the same brutal lesson that power does not just corrupt the people who are corruptible, but it destroys those who seem to be incorruptible. But why? Why is it that even those who think they are seeking power for the right reasons almost always end up succumbing to corruption or losing power? Well, there are a lot of philosophical theories that tackle this very question. But before we get into the theories behind power and corruption, I want to make something very clear. There will always be those that seek power for the wrong reasons. Whether it's money, influence, or simply the idea of power itself, high roles tend to attract very specific personality types, which is why we end up with corrupt systems in the first place. However, there are people who look at the system and think that they are going to change that. And today, I want to focus on these individuals. What happens to good people that seek power for the sole purpose of serving those under them, or just dismantling the corrupt system itself? Do their values change? Do they get greedy? Or is it really that a power role in and of itself is an immoral role? Well, to answer these questions, I want to turn to Machiavelli's The Prince. Machiavelli makes the argument that political virtue is actually not the same as moral virtue, at least the way that we think of. A leader who we might see as immoral or corrupt is actually a false perception on our end. Instead, someone in a political role or a high position must separate themselves from the morals of those he or she is above. What separates a leader from those being led is that a leader sometimes has to make harsh decisions that could have some pretty dire consequences. Let's take this as an example. You're a manager at a high-end video game company. One day, an employee takes some company data home, which is very clearly against company policy. Now, when you confront this employee, they tell you that it was an honest mistake and they thought they were taking personal files home, not the company ones. And you tell him that even if this is true, you are still under an obligation to fire him for breaking company policy. But he begs and tells you that he needs this job and that he truly did make a simple mistake. His wife just had a baby and he cannot get fired. And against your better judgment, because you are a moral and just person, you let him stay. Under a probationary period, of course. But 3 weeks later, he does the same thing without you knowing. And this time, he doesn't bother to come back. He sells the very secure and very confidential information to an entirely different video game company. And because they have your data without you knowing about it, that company turns around and builds the very game that your company has been working on for years, resulting in millions of dollars lost and countless hours of labor wasted. And you're fired the next day. A leader who tries to be morally good in all circumstances, who always tries to tell the truth, keep their promises, and shows mercy, will be destroyed by those who don't share those same constraints. A leader must make decisions that might be morally gray or might make them feel a little slimy. You can't fire a man who has a newborn at home for making a simple mistake. But what you failed to account for was that people lie, they cheat, and they steal. They are not playing by the same rules that you are. If you weren't fired at the time, you would certainly have changed your leadership style afterwards. Maybe you wouldn't care about when people say their kid is sick and they need to go home, because you remember being manipulated by the idea of parenthood. Maybe you wouldn't let people make simple mistakes like using the wrong code line, because you see everything as having malicious intent. Now, this isn't about power corrupting people in the traditional sense. It's not like once you get into a powerful position that you suddenly change into a different person. It's about power revealing that the rules of politics and leadership are fundamentally different from the rules of private morality. What we call corruption might just be the price of survival in that arena. If you try to play by these same moral rules that exist outside of powerful positions, you get burned. But this is a pretty hard pill to swallow for those of us who have never been in leadership positions. It suggests that virtue itself is a liability in leadership. And throughout history, there have been leaders who rejected this cynicism entirely, who believed that moral integrity was not just compatible with power, but essential to it. And one of the most famous examples is Marcus Aurelius, the closest thing that Rome ever got to Plato's philosopher king that we discussed in a previous video. He was a Stoic emperor by all means, who wrote meditations on military campaigns, reminding himself to be rational, just, and forgiving. He embodied virtue and ethics, and was truly focused on seeing past the corruption that was set into the heart of politics. And he was betrayed constantly. His trusted general declared himself emperor based on a rumor that Marcus had died. And when Marcus crushed the rebellion, instead of following the traditional path of execution and punishment, he pardoned all of the conspirators and even refused to read a list of the people involved. I mean, can you imagine the current president or any other major leader actually allowing their enemies to go free with no consequences? No. But pure Stoic principles state to focus only on what you can control, which is your own virtue. So Aurelius, intent on keeping his virtue, allowed those around him to essentially do as they please. Even his wife was rumored to be involved in plots against him. And whether the rumors were true or not, Marcus refused to investigate or punish. His commitment to trust and dignity meant his conspirators knew they could operate openly, because Marcus would always choose to believe the best in people, even when the evidence suggested otherwise, which made him predictable, because people knew exactly what Marcus's values were, and that he would do anything to follow his principles. So they knew he would show mercy and he would not strike preemptively. They knew his moral commitments. In other words, his greatest strength, which he believed to be his unshakable virtue, was his fatal weakness. His altruism did not stand a chance against people willing to do horrible things to overthrow him. And the ultimate tragedy is that he could not bring himself to break the line of succession. So Rome inherited Commodus, one of its worst emperors. Marcus's philosophical principles about duty to family overrode political wisdom, and the empire paid the price. Now, if you fast forward to today's politics, the same pattern holds. We watch supposedly virtuous people enter government, full of ideals about public service, and somehow they still end up compromised. Take the idealistic city council member who campaigns against developer money. She runs a platform of affordable housing and transparency, refusing donations from real estate interests. But 6 months in, she learns the only way to fund the homeless shelter that she promised is to approve a luxury condo project that will probably displace the very people she's trying to help. The developer's campaign contributions suddenly look less like corruption and more like the price of doing business. And she can remain pure and watch her constituents sleep on the streets. Or she can compromise and actually build something, even if it means becoming exactly what she campaigned against. So, did the power corrupt her? Or did she simply learn Machiavelli's lesson? That you cannot play by different rules than everyone else and survive. But what if this is too simplistic? Surely there are ways to play games with people that don't involve corrupting yourself. Not everyone in politics or big business is evil and out to destroy humanity, right? Well, no, at least not at first. Because trying to get on everyone else's playing field is not the nail in the coffin that seals your corruption. No. The corruption comes from something far more simplistically human than that. Power does not just corrupt people through a weakness of will, but through a reward structure. Normally, when we do something morally wrong, there's guilt. And even if you don't feel guilty at first, there's social and moral consequences to your actions. But when powerful people do something morally wrong, it is reframed. They're not called unethical, but instead called smart, strategic, or a savvy political operator. The media analyzes their brilliant chess move, and their colleagues admire their pragmatism. So instead of punishment, they receive rewards and praise and advancements, and even access to more power. And what makes this so insidious is that humans are tribal beings. We don't just want success. We want approval from our peer group. And when you are in a room with other powerful people, they become your reference group. The people calling your compromises smart are your colleagues and your allies. Their praise feels like moral validation, even if from the outside you are an immoral person. You start to genuinely believe that what you're doing is sophisticated. Even if you personally don't care about the praise, you're surrounded by people who do. So the higher you climb, the more your success depends on individuals who are playing for those same rewards. You may want your company to sell healthy food products that taste good, but to do so, it is 10 times cheaper to use child labor in other countries. Sure, it sounds bad, but you aren't the one employing the kids, per se. The services are already being used by other companies. You are just trying to stay competitive. So even if you entered politics as a Marcus Aurelius, determined to remain incorruptible, you face an impossible choice. Play their game enough to accomplish something, or remain pure and accomplish nothing. The incorruptible leader who refuses to compromise gets outmaneuvered, defunded, and sidelined, while the smart operators who learned to work the system get results. Corrupted results, but results nonetheless. And slowly, imperceivably, even the virtuous ones start to realize that just this once for the greater good is the only way to play the game. So maybe Machiavelli was right. Maybe the problem is not that power corrupts good people, but instead that we expect political leaders to operate by the same moral rules as private citizens. And that expectation, in and of itself, is naive. Marcus Aurelius was not corrupted by power. He was destroyed by his refusal to adapt to what power actually requires. The modern politician is not corrupted by accepting lobbyist money. They're simply adapting to the only game in town. But can incorruptible people survive in a system designed to reward corruption? Well, history suggests that the answer is absolutely not. If the system requires corruption to function, then the system itself is the problem. But we've already discussed why humans need governments and experts to run society. So the true tragedy is that while we need systems of power in place, those systems tend to corrupt over time, even if they're designed to be incorruptible. Checks and balances were supposed to ensure that the government did not get out of control. But over the years, the system has changed, and certain branches of government have given up their responsibilities, while others have gained massive influence. The hard truth is that there is no perfect politician or company. You might have good people here and there, but the ultimate result is always the same. Someone comes along and starts to dismantle the good in favor of profit, power, and influence. And if you don't believe this is true, I'll leave you with a simple task. Find a country or a company that has been around for a long time, that is completely virtuous. Find one single example where power has been transferred multiple times and the institution remained consistent with its own stated moral principles. If it exists, I'd love to see it. But with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.